everyone, welcome back to my channel. It's Allison, and today we're going to be doing some different masking techniques for stenciling. Today we're going to be using the brand new Layering Apple stencil set. This is from Simon Says Stamp, and by the way, this is part of a blog hop. I'll have more on that later. For our stenciling today, well, to start off, we're going to be using my favorite grip mat, the 6x6 grip mat from Waffle Flower. And the guide for this grip mat has measurements for an A2 panel and for the panel I'm using, which is a 4x5¼ inch. That's my favorite size panel because when you put it on a card base, it leaves a nice margin around the side. So because these are 6x6 stencils, I can lay my stencil on the 6x6 grip mat and it just clings to it, and I don't need any tape to hold the stencil down. And by the way, everything is on top of my water media mat, which my little ink cubes kind of stick to it, and I don't need to hold my ink cubes, and it's easier for you to see everything. So we're going to be doing basic stenciling for this first round. This is the first stencil where you color the base of the apple, and I used a pale yellow ink for that. And now I'm coming in with my second stencil. It's easy to line up, especially because, again, the stencil is 6x6, my grip mat is 6x6, and it's also easy to just, line everything up with that first stencil, the first stencil marks. So for the highlight of the apple, I'm coming in with a green ink, and there's going to be lots of stenciling today, so I'm going to try to breeze through some of it so that we all don't get too bored of watching me stencil. So there's the second stencil, and I can't remember if I mentioned already, this is a set of 4 stencils. So the third and fourth stencil do the little leaf and the stem. But before I do those, I'm coming back with the first stencil. And I'm going to take my green brush and very lightly go over this again. And this is just going to kind of marry those two colors so there's not as sharp of a contrast between the two. You don't have to do this. In fact, I didn't really do this later on with other cards. I think it's cute either way, with the stark contrast between the two colors, or what I did, which is kind of, blending them a little bit together. So here, and by the way, on all these stencils, you can see which is the top of the stencil, and that's going to come in important later. You'll see why. But so this is the third stencil, and this does the little leaf, which I did in a dark green color. And now we're ready to just finish up that fourth stencil, which is the stem. And so again, I wanted to show you what this looked like, just basic stenciling. So here it is. Super cute, super easy. You could make so many fun, quick cards with this design and maybe just do different colors of apples. So here's our first masking technique. I have a new panel, and you can see I have taped off one of the apples. And I'm going to call this kind of a highlight. We're going to highlight this one apple. So super easy to just, put tape over that one hole. And I put tape over the same hole for the second stencil. And I'm coming in with my darker green color. And for the third and fourth stencil, well, actually, but before I do the third and fourth, we're going to color that little apple red. So now I have taped off outside of that apple so that I don't get red ink on the green apples that I already inked up. And again, I'll do the same thing with the second stencil. I'm going to stencil that red. So super easy to do that. And like I had started saying, the third and fourth stencil, I don't need to do any masking because regardless of what color the apple is, the stems and the leaves go in the same spot. But what I am going to do now is I'm going to come back in with that first stencil again. And it still has tape around it, so I don't need to worry about getting anything on my green apples. And now I'm going to come in with my Nuvo Glimmer paste. This is the Moonstone, so it's kind of clear. And I'm just going to quickly add that over the stencil. So not only is it red, but now it's shiny. And I think it's just a super fun technique. All right, let's move on. And I promise we're going to make cards with all this later, but I wanted to show you all these techniques first. So now I have this 6x6 piece of cardstock. And remember, the stencil is 6x6, so I'm just taping them to my water media mat so that the stencil doesn't shift. I could have used pixie spray, but I didn't feel like it. And now I'm going to call this a spotlight technique. I learned this from Jennifer McGuire. I just have a little piece of paper. I used a small round die that was about the size of the apple. And now I can come in with this little mask that I created and color each apple whatever color I want. So you don't have to worry about getting ink on the surrounding apples, and you really could color every apple on the stencil a different color. But that would be crazy. I'm just going to stick to my pink and green palette. So I'm going to do kind of diagonal lines of pink and green. So here I am with the green. Now I did make a separate mask for the green because I didn't want to mix my pink and green inks. And voila, super easy. And now I have the second stencil for the highlight of the apple, but because I'm using a smaller brush, I don't need to use any tape or do anything else to mask the apples around it. Now, here I am finishing the pink, but you may notice or you may not notice, but I have flipped my stencils upside down. So this is a fun thing you can do with stencils. You can use the reverse side of it, and I'll show you in a minute what it looks like compared to the original. But again, I flipped the leaf and the stem over as well so that it all lined up properly. And look how cool that looks. And now I'll show you what it looks like compared to the original. So here's the original one, and you can see the highlight and the leaf are now on the other side. And I just think it's a fun little trick. All right, for my last masking technique, I now have my 8.5-inch square grip mat, and I have a note card on top of it that I've already scored. This is a small note card, 3.5 by 5 inch. And now I'm coming in with my stencil, and I just want to stencil the front of my note card. So I'm grabbing the transparency or the carrier sheet that comes with this 8.5-inch grip mat, and I'm covering the line of apples that are above that score line or the fold of my card base. And so now I can just stencil without worrying about getting ink on the back of my note card. And so I'll do that for all 4 stencils, but here you can see what a clean line you get. There's going to be no ink on the back of my card. So here's the final reveal. I didn't think you needed to see all 4 stencils being done, but here's what it looks like when I'm all done, and just the front of my note card is stenciled. So it's nice to do, a 1-layer card. So let's finish this little guy up. I stenciled on a little apple on the front of this envelope. And remember, this is a small note card. And I used the Just a Note die. This is a brand new die. I thought it was the perfect size for this little note card. And because I thought it looked so cute having the apple on the front of this envelope, I decided to stencil some on the back of an envelope too. All right, here we are with that panel with the shiny apple. And I had always intended on using this You Shine die with this. And by the way, I obviously had already attached this panel to a pink card base. But as I put the sentiment on, I decided it just didn't look right. The apple was like too far to the center. So what I've done is I've cut a sheet of vellum, and it's the same exact size as my apple panel. And I cut a rectangle out of the middle, and I use my Waffle Flower A2 layers set, which I use all the time. And so I've cut that rectangle out of the center of that vellum. And the idea is that that vellum is going to kind of mute the surrounding apples around the edges. But to highlight that opening, I'm going to use the stitched rectangle frames from My Favorite Things. And I've cut this twice out of white cardstock. And the idea is that it's just going to cover that opening so everything in the middle doesn't have vellum and everything on the outside of the frame does have vellum. And then, I'll just position my sentiment. And I thought it was kind of a cute idea. So I just wanted to show you how I adhered this, because this frame is barely bigger than the opening. I just put a very thin line of glue right around the opening on top of that vellum. And I've taped the vellum in place temporarily so that it doesn't move. And then I'll just come in with that rectangular frame and make sure that it's all centered and that it's covering that, very thin amount of vellum, because that's the only thing that's going to be keeping this vellum in place. And I'm coming in with my T-ruler to make sure my frame is all nice and squared. And here we are. Now the U-shine I cut out of some green glitter paper. And you can see, again, the vellum is not attached on the sides. It's only attached by that frame. And I really love how it turned out. I think it really highlights that apple. All right, now we're going to use this pillow box die, and that is why I had used a 6x6 sheet of paper for this particular stencil. And we're just going to cut, I'm just lining everything up, and here it is when I brought it out of the die cutting machine. And this pillow box die is super easy to put together. There's basically 2 score lines, and I'm going to use my bone folder to reinforce them. And then I'm going to take double-sided tape. I use Scor-Tape. And once that is on, it's just a matter of folding the 2 sides together. Super easy. Now once that's done, there's also score lines at each end. So I'm just going to kind of carefully bend these in place. Now one thing I will say, this is my first time using this die, I would not use thick paper for this. I think I was using 80-pound Nina. But I think this die would be perfect for your paper pads. Like, you could just go to town and take a 6x6 paper pad and make a bunch of these cute little boxes. So here's that one done. And then I made another one that I thought it would be cute to have pink on one side and green on the other. So I actually masked when I was stenciling, so the top half of my stencil was pink and the top half was green. And these are going to be really cute when I put little ribbons around them, and I think they'd be cute to give to teachers. So I unfortunately don't have footage of this card, but this is my favorite card that I've made. It was kind of just a spur of the moment idea that I had a few days later. I will have details on my blog for this, and you'll want to go to the blog anyway because, like I said at the beginning, this is part of a blog hop. So I will have a link to my blog, but you'll see the repeating circles die. That's the die that's on top that has all those circle openings. But definitely go to the blog for all the details. And here are my final cards. I really love how they came out. I love doing different techniques with stencils, and I had so much fun with this set. I thank you so much for joining me today, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.